This is a Stories to be Told podcast. Hi everyone and welcome back to another episode of Stories to be Told, the podcast series. In this podcast episode, I take a look at one aspect of how Britain commemorates its colonial past, the evidence in which this takes shape, and the simple fact that this evidence is not just a statue or a landmark in a major city, but is actually all around us, and we interact with this evidence throughout the course of our daily lives. What am I alluding to? I'm alluding to the fact that there is so much evidence about colonialism on your own doorstep, where you live in your local area. It has become easy to engage in discussions that create a polarised society about colonialism and the evidence that remains of it today. However, I think it's important, if not vital, to understand that a great way to begin your own learning journey about not just colonialism, but any aspect of the past, is to follow a line of inquiry, starting from your own immediate experience. This episode can be viewed as a sequel to my previous episode, What Do We Know About Edward Colston?, where I explored some perspectives on the life of this man and provided questions for thought and discussion. I also looked at the wider issue on whether statues and landmarks that honour people associated with the transatlantic slave trade and colonialism should be removed or should remain and or be renamed. This debate has recently been extended to looking at revising street names that have associations with Britain's colonial past, and whether these also should be renamed and have their negative history erased. Inspired by this debate, I decided to carry out some research on street names in my own local area of Watford town in the UK. I began by Googling and looking at a current map of Watford, and I found 6 roads situated in the same area with colonial associations, and these are Imperial Way, Colonial Way, Federal Way, Clive Way, Rhodes Way, and Salisbury Road. We are all familiar with the terms colonial and imperial, but you may not be familiar with the names Clive, Rhodes, and Salisbury. Here's a quick explanation of the origins of these names. Robert Clive, 1725 to 1774, was also known as Clive of India, or first Baron Clive of Plassey, and was instrumental in defeating the Bengal ruler and his French allies in the Battle of Plassey in 1757. On becoming the first general of Plassey, established British rule in India through the British East India Company. Cecil John Rhodes, 1853 to 1902, was a mining magnate, politician and British imperialist who annexed vast amounts of land in southern Africa. The ideology of apartheid is often related back to his views of the British being superior to the indigenous African population. Zimbabwe was actually named Rhodesia after him. Robert Arthur Talbot Gascoigne Cecil, 3rd Marquess of Salisbury, was a British politician during the time of Cecil John Rhodes' activities in southern Africa. During one of his terms as Prime Minister, 1885-6, the capital city of Zimbabwe, then known as Rhodesia, was renamed Salisbury after him. There are probably other roads in Watford that also have associations with colonialism. However, as this is a whole new area of my learning journey to be developed, I decided to use these roads as a starting point for my inquiry, as they were here, right on my doorstep. So I decided to take an early morning stroll around the area during the May half-term break. Out of these 6 roads, only one was residential, which is Salisbury Road. The other 5 make up an area of land that is currently used as an industrial complex of offices, warehouses, and showrooms for building materials, household products, and furniture. I asked myself the question, why were these particular roads given these names? What factors may have led to this decision? What was the significance of this area, if any? Other related questions that came to mind were, who might have owned this land? Did the land on these streets have a different use in the past, and if so, when did the use of the land change to its current use today? To try and find answers to these questions, I began with a simple street check, but this only provided census information from the previous 10 years. So I visited Watford's Central Library. However, the archives were closed and would remain closed for the foreseeable future, but I was able to obtain some information about the origins of street names in Watford and listed buildings in the Watford area. I discovered that there were no listed buildings within the area of this industrial complex, but I surmised that there were probably buildings in Watford that did have a connection with colonialism, even if they were not situated on these specific roads. I decided that this could be another line of inquiry for focused research in the future. What did I find out about these street names? According to the sources that I used, Imperial Way, Colonial Way, Federal Way, Clive Way and Rhodes Way were a complex of roads that were renamed during the 1940s to early 1960s in celebration of Britain's empire, and possibly coincided with celebrations marking the end of World War II in 1945. We can therefore conclude that the names of Clive and Rhodes related to this celebration as well as directly to the figures I spoke about earlier. As for Salisbury Road, this name was indeed inspired by the Prime Minister to celebrate his third term in office, 1896 to 1902. So, should we rename certain streets because they allude to a negative past? The only way to come to a possible conclusion is to go on your own learning journey and become less influenced by the emotive issues and more informed by following a line of inquiry, in taking some time to study the evidence around you and their origins. From my perspective, the issue is not just changing the names, but also what names do we replace them with? Who decides on the new names? What should these names be associated with? Can you simply erase an aspect of the past by simply renaming? In renaming, what other aspects of the past are we erasing too? Street names are often a more integral part of our history, culture and way of life, as where we live and or where we come from and what these are named often forms a part of our individual and collective identities and life experiences. If street names are changed, are we just doing things right in order to ease some sort of collective political conscience? Or should we be doing the right thing, using street names to learn about and understand our past and being a constant reminder of not only what happened, but that it shouldn't happen again? If we erase the past, then future generations may be at risk of making the mistakes that the past can teach us never to repeat. Historical inquiry is something that we are taught in school throughout our childhood, but have we disregarded it as adults? Developing our curiosity is vital to developing our understanding about issues that are seen as problematic, particularly in history. But isn't all history problematic? If this is the case, then how can we or should we solve it? A possible answer could be that it is simply a matter of learning about the past in order to learn from the past, and beginning this learning by starting on our own doorstep. If you liked this podcast, then stay on my website or this listening platform and check out my other podcasts related to this episode. What Do We Know About Edward Colston, that I mentioned earlier, and A Call to Action, Macmillan's Wind of Change speech, and the extended version, Wind of Change Expanded, which are both an analysis of Prime Minister Macmillan's 1960 landmark speech about the end of Britain's empire. As always, It is a pleasure and a privilege to share my learning journey with you in this podcast, and I encourage you to either begin or continue your own. History is a matter of fact or perspective. Thanks so much for listening again, and I'll see you on the next page.